to Ryerson for having us. I have a question that I always like to start with, which is a little bit different in terms of introduction, because you can look these guys up on LinkedIn, you should add them, they're all fantastic and brilliant. But what I like to know is, what's the thing that first attracted you to Bitcoin and blockchain, and how did you become involved in this crazy world?
All right, I'll start it off. So I'm Evan Thomas, you can tell from the photo up there. I'm a lawyer, litigator, so courtroom, not boardroom kind of lawyer at Osler. I had a life before law where I was a coder, systems administrator back during the .com thing. Any of you remember that? Anyway, we ran out of money. I had to do something else, and I had made the brilliant idea to go to law school instead. So, you know, we can reserve judgment on how wise a decision that was. And as a result, my practice tends to involve cases involving technology in some degree. So I do, work with things sort of privacy, data security, software, disputes involving software. So maybe it was about 4 or 5 years ago. I think it was definitely around the time that the Silk Road was still around. I sort of got wind through people I know from my former tech life of Bitcoin. I took a look at it and realized, you know what? Primary use case seems to be like terrorism and guns for hire, murder for hire. I probably shouldn't get involved in this, especially since I don't do criminal law. So I kind of put it aside for a few years, which again, another poor decision in retrospect. But it was in the last couple of years, partly due to the efforts of a friend who got interested in it and actually started getting involved in it in a personal way. And then professionally, particularly in the last 18 months or so, it's increasingly crept into my professional life as clients have come to our firm with great ideas of businesses they want to build around cryptocurrency and blockchain. And so working with others in the firm, working with them to help them understand some of the legal issues that Dan alluded to, whether it's under securities law, under tax law, anti-money-laundering law, and then just general risks, and that's sort of where I come in. So that's been really exciting because, as Dan noted, there are all these new legal issues, completely uncharted territory, and we're having to take all of these ancient decisions from the 1970s and even earlier and figure out how they apply in this new world. And my dream as litigators, I want to be the guy who argues the case in the Supreme Court that updates the one from the 70s about the bags of silver coins and why this cryptocurrency or that token or whatever is not a security. So that's what really interests me, and that's how kind of I got to it here. And look forward to your questions and sharing some of what I know with you today.
Amazing. So I'm Steven. I was actually a paralegal, so almost like Evan here, but pretty much a quarter of the pay, probably a quarter of the education, and a quarter of the schooling. So I was actually working in a bankruptcy firm that did Fintech, and I was trying to be progressive and advance my career. So I tried to learn as much about Fintech. Started listening to a bunch of podcasts, and they started talking about blockchain and cryptocurrency. This was around when it was about $200, so maybe I think it was about 2015. And I was like so interested. I was like, I don't want to be a paralegal anymore. I want to get into the tech world. I want to move to Silicon Valley, that kind of mentality and thinking. And I realized I don't even know how to use Excel. So the podcast was talking about becoming a compliance officer and how all these companies are thinking about sales and technology, but they're not thinking about compliance. I was like, oh, that's perfect with my legal background, something I can jump into. So I reached out actually to the podcaster, and he gave me a list of things to do, including becoming an anti-money laundering investigator. I worked at HSBC, and finally my final goal was to work for a startup, and now I'm working for Bitfinex, which is a cryptocurrency exchange. So that's my story.
Hi everyone, I'm Giles. I work at a company called Thornton. We're basically one of the big accounting firms, but we also do a lot of advisory work and consulting. So I work in the consulting side of the business. I probably had a relatively traditional start in the sense that I did a business degree. I was working, and I'm from England, and I went down to London after I graduated because I just wanted to kind of start working and make a bit of money. I, like Laura, actually got into the recruitment space myself to begin with. I don't know what it is about that field, like getting into it, but it was a nice way in, and I was kind of specializing in recruiting actually accountants into organizations like the one I work in now. But it was specific around financial services, people who wanted to work with financial services clients. But I always wanted to be in a management consulting role, some kind of consulting role where I was kind of using my brain to pick apart problems and figure out solutions to them. I didn't want something which was kind of a mundane, repetitive thing. So my end goal at the time was always to get into management consulting. And so my first foray, I hated recruitment. No offense to recruitment, I just didn't like it. And I managed to find an opportunity in one of the large banks in the UK in their internal management consulting team, and I was specializing in doing kind of digital banking strategy, which at the time, this was, I don't know, 5-6 years ago, it was kind of that whole digital banking, having an app on your phone where you can send money, that was like kind of new thing, right? So this is really exciting, and that was really the first time where I found the benefits that technology could bring to a more traditional financial world. So then that kind of went along. I joined Grant Thornton after a few years of doing that because I wanted sort of more exposure to external-facing client roles and working with a variety of clients, still within the financial services space. And then, through various reasons, decided to make a move with the company out here to Canada. And that was in January last year, so I've been here for coming up to 2 years now, 1 year and 3 quarters. And what was really interesting was I was looking to send some money from my UK bank account to the account that I was about to open up in Canada. And I'll talk a little bit about that in a second, but I found the process was really cumbersome. It took forever, and it costed actually quite a lot of money in fees to do, and I thought there has to be a better way of doing this. And I kind of heard a little bit about cryptocurrency and blockchain, and so I kind of researched it and thought, this might be the thing. Tried it, and the difference was amazing. It was, I could transfer some money in a matter of minutes, and it costed a fraction of the price. So that was my kind of, in my personal life, my opening to the cryptocurrency world. And then now that I work in GT, a big part of my role, at least for the last kind of year and a half, I work with a number of other leaders in the firm to think about how a more traditional firm like ours can turn our services to the cryptocurrency and blockchain industry. And so the majority of my work is spent kind of figuring that out, primarily in the risk management space and compliance, the regulatory aspect of it, but it expands out elsewhere as well. So yeah, that's kind of how I ended up getting into the space.
I've talked about this a little bit in my intro, and Evan actually kind of went over some of the very similar things. But the opportunity to be dealing with legal issues that have not been litigated, that have not been decided, that are changing every day with the technology, and the opportunity to be ahead of the regulators is really exciting. I mean, it's really exciting to be working with people who are bringing technology, like world-changing technology, into the mainstream, and being able to help them achieve that is really rewarding. And like I said before, it's fascinating and challenging and a little bit scary at times too.
Awesome. So given that a lot of things are new and sometimes we don't know the answer, sometimes we do. And what are the things that you most wish that people knew when they first come in to talk to you? So when I first come in and say, hey, I want to launch my ICO, what do you wish that I already understood?
Sure, yeah, if I can start with that one. I think that it would be helpful if everyone looked around at what their competitors are doing and realized that just because somebody else is doing that doesn't make it okay. Like we have a lot of people, there are a lot of people in this new industry who either are willing to take the risk of partial or no compliance, are ignorant to the existence of these regulatory obligations, or who just need a little bit more education. And so if they come in and they say, well, like this ICO raised this much in this amount of time, let's do that. Let's follow that model. And in my position, I mean, I can't be recommending to people to be just ignoring the law, because then I'm not doing my job in terms of helping them out. So I think that it's going along with that is be patient. Like if you have wonderful technology, if you have an idea that is going to change the world and create a new market or satisfy like a market need, there's time. There's time to do it. You do not need to rush out and do everything all at once just because everybody else did. And perhaps the fact that they did might be their downfall in the end.
Next, yeah. Yeah, I'll probably give a slightly different answer. It kind of alludes to a little bit about what you said, Amber. When I work with a number of the different exchanges, Bitcoin ATM operators, people on the outside, clients on the outside looking to get into the space, something that I'm always really honest about with them is that I'm learning too in this space, and I want them to know that. I always say kind of beware of the person who claims to be an expert in blockchain. You know, it's like, I certainly don't, and you know, I'm learning all the time. So it's a little bit different to the more traditional, you know, more traditional clients that we work with in our company, where, you know, we might have done accounting for 50 years, or you know, I should probably know how long my firm's been around for. But you know, it's all, I think what I'm trying to say is it's all right that, you know, I want them to know that I probably won't have all the answers all the time, but I'm very much there to work with them to get to, you know, where they need to be, and hopefully I'll learn along the way at the same time. You know, we can talk about fees and whatever later, but also I'll kind of say that, you know, a lot of the times when, you know, a firm might initially approach us, it might not be the right time for them to engage in the type of services that we can give them. You know, it's there's often a kind of mad panic to think, you know, I need to do this, or I need this advice, or I need to get this so that I can, you know, get a bank account or whatever it is. But actually, you know, maybe it alludes to the patience point as well. Sometimes, you know, I have to be quite honest and say, look, you probably want to come back to us in a year's time when you've maybe thought this through a little bit more, and, you know, we're quite happy to wait. So I think my overall message is, you know, it's just about, I want them to know that I'm learning, and I'll, you know, I'll be honest with that, and hopefully learn with them along the way.
Well, no one really, in AML, so no really clients come to me and directly.
But you still have your clients that are coming.
No, everyone comes to us
yeah.
and asks me and my colleague Russ, like, how do we get verified? How can we get listed on your crypto exchange? But for me, just from an interior standpoint, I think just understanding KYC stands for Know Your Customer. And at the blockchain conference in Toronto, people were slinging around the word KYC. Yeah, I have someone else doing it. We have this vendor. I think it's important to, if you're a startup or any kind of firm, is to know who your customers are before you outsource it or scale it to anybody else. I think, you know, she would probably be a really good, Laura would probably be a really good AML investigator, because she probably knows what's happening within her organization. She's probably heard all the customer problems, and you can use that information to create trends on what the market's doing, or what the industry's doing, or what people are using your specific platform for. And not only is that great to know from an AML standpoint, even if you are going to outsource to companies like GT, but it's also good for a marketing standpoint. If you know what all your customers are doing, or what problems or issues, you can actually save money by using that information in Interior. It's funny, everyone that complains about how expensive compliance is are the same people that, although they outsource compliance, they also outsource companies to tell them who their customers are and what the market research tells them. So I think it's all that information, and money could be saved if you use the employees that you have in the AML and the customer support.
I mean, you know, the risk of repeating what others have said, I guess, the way I approach this question is that if someone walks in the door of our firm to ask us something, I'm grateful that they knew that they needed advice. Because anyone entering the cryptocurrency or blockchain space, you're getting into a sector that is probably, and maybe health is different, but it's the sector that's the most heavily regulated, you know, in the world. There are so many regulatory regimes that potentially touch it, and, you know, health might be the only one that has more. And so I guess I worry a bit more about the people who don't know that they need advice. And I know that sounds a little bit self-serving, and something like advice business as are most of the people in this panel. But I'm grateful that people do come to us seeking advice, and we give a lot of advice that we don't charge for, because first and foremost, we don't want to see clients or potential clients getting themselves into trouble in a sector like this. So I guess what I wish the people who don't come to us know is that they do need advice, and there is advice available, and they should be seeking that out. Like, of course, if people don't come to me, I can't tell them that. So encourage people, get advice.
And good advice from knowledgeable people. That actually leads in really well into the next question, which is that sometimes we just don't know what we don't know. And so for a business operating in Canada, what are the things that they should be thinking about in terms of securities law, in terms of tax, in terms of AML?
Do we have 3 or 4 days? No, I mean, I guess there are a lot. Just about every business getting into cryptocurrency blockchain is potentially going to have a securities law issue, is potentially going to have an anti-money-laundering issue. I can guarantee is going to have a tax issue, and is probably going to have just general commercial issues like any other business. So yeah, I guess it can't be more specific than that, because there are a whole lot of issues and they're all novel, and they're always going to depend on the nature of the business or get some people coming in the door. So with some really creative, novel ideas, like on top of the novelty of blockchain as a technology. So I don't know the issues, I don't know yet, but hope to figure that out along with our clients.
From an AML standpoint, I think the regulations are changing, they're evolving. From an AML standpoint, though, we've seen a preview of what some of the regulations are going to look like when they come into effect. I think you take you err on the side of caution. Like CoinSquare, they're ahead of the curve when it comes to, and same with Bitfinex. We know what the regulations might be. We want to go above and beyond what the regulations are saying. We don't want to meet that minimum standard, which turns out to be a gray area, especially when it comes to law. So you want to do more than what you would have to do, and plan ahead. Like I just saw in the news, a great company, Shapeshift, just spent $1 million, getting legal advice in regards to some of the changes around their KYC. And that's a huge expense, but if you're a startup, you may not have that much money to make a change once regulations are black and white. So plan ahead, adjust, and allot some of that money that you're raising to compliance.
I think what I'll add to that is, I think if you're a business looking to get into this space, you've got to kind of really have a tough conversation and figure out whether you really want to be under the scrutiny of a lot of this regulatory, all these rules. I mean, they're onerous, and equally, we're still in a little bit of maybe very much a grey area in many respects in regards to the regulation. I mean, as Stephen's mentioned, there has been, certainly on the AML side, some proposed amendments to the current regulations. We've been, I know Amber, you have as well, in some of those conversations where the industry has actually come to the table to give feedback on those. And I don't know, there was a lot of feedback was given.
And a lot of different feedback.
A lot of different feedback. It's not clear yet for a number of people operating in this space exactly how those are going to fall on them. And you've got to really think whether that's something you want to go through. And equally as well, particularly on the AML side, there's a number of different challenges in the crypto space, be it around how you're identifying your customers, transaction monitoring, all those kind of things which the regulator is going to expect you to be on top of. The challenge is, I feel like there's hardly any precedent that's been set from an anti-money laundering perspective in the crypto world, far less than there has been in a fiat sense. So again, whilst you have this kind of compounding effect of this grey regulatory area, and then but people expecting you to be doing something, and then actually the crypto world, the transactions look very different to the way they do in a fiat world. And so how do you apply those regulations? And it just goes on and on and on. So those are the kind of things that you have to kind of really have tough questions to ask about yourself and whether you really want to commit to this space, because it's tricky, it's onerous.
Yeah, I'm going to pick up on what Giles was saying and kind of put it in a different way, and that is know your product and focus on your product. We have people come in occasionally who say, well, I want to do an ICO, or we want to do a blockchain project, but that's kind of putting the cart before the horse. I think that the more important thing is, what is your product, who are you selling it to, and once you know that, everything else should fall into place. Sure, in 2017 there were a lot of opportunities to raise a lot of money very quickly, and it's really tempting, and I understand that completely. But it's probably going to be a detriment to your business in the long term if you try to shoehorn your business into an ICO when that's not the way that you want it to capitalize, as it turns out. Because then you've got all these stakeholders immediately that you need to answer to, and you need to design a product on their timeline, to their expectations, rather than taking the time yourselves to know your product and let that be the driving force.
Yeah, that sounds like a lot of regulation and a lot of rules. What if instead of doing that, I want to take my business maybe to a friendlier jurisdiction, to a jurisdiction that's courting my ICO, to a jurisdiction that's supporting my blockchain project? How do I make the decision about whether or not to do that? And what do you tell people that come to ask that question?
Giles, you want to start with that one? You're probably best. You're probably best on that one.
Yeah. So is it why would I be moving abroad? Well, it's interesting actually. Some of the feedback that has been received in these, we call them consultation sessions around these new proposed amendments to the regulations. That's part of the feedback that was given by some in the industry. Why should I be sticking around in Canada if these regulations that you're proposing are going to be doing X, Y, and Z? I might have to comply with all these different rules and regulations. Why should I be sticking around? Yeah, it's a fair question, and arguably that is one reason why you might want to move to another jurisdiction that is arguably more friendly and flexible in regards to your business. Maybe something I'll say to that is it doesn't necessarily, it's not quite as simple to say, okay, I'm just going to move to another jurisdiction and be free of the regulatory compliance in Canada. Part of the new proposed changes is that you can still be captured under Canadian regulation if you're operating internationally and you have customers and you're fulfilling a number of criteria about how you direct services to them. So it's not quite as simple as just saying, okay, I'm going to consider moving into a different jurisdiction. The other thing I'll say is that if you're going to do that, you need to be very clear and educated on the jurisdiction you're moving into and the requirements there. It's, as I kind of talked about already, I should have maybe brought it along. There's a map I saw recently of kind of the regulatory treatment with regards to cryptocurrency across the globe, and there's a whole range of countries and how they're approaching it. From people who are fully regulating it but maybe forward for it, versus countries that have made it completely illegal and so on and so forth. So it's still messy out there, and it doesn't necessarily mean to say that the grass is going to be greener on the other side. And we've actually seen, if we think about it in another way, a couple of organizations certainly coming into Canada from outside because of those reasons, because of the complexities that are still found in other jurisdictions. So it's not a simple question to answer, and with all these things, you need to be kind of clued up and really sort of know what you're walking into and realize that it's potentially in the future not going to be quite as simple just to say, okay, I'm going to leave Canada and be gone from that regulatory scrutiny.
Yeah, I think in the early 2017, I think a lot of companies found it appealing to go offshore, a lot of Canadian companies, because the idea was, they were selling utility tokens rather than security tokens. And if you're selling those in Canada, you have to pay tax on it at a full rate. And so if you move to Barbados or Cayman if you're in the States, or someplace that has a tax treaty with your home jurisdiction, you might be able to raise all that money tax-free. Since ICOs have kind of lost popularity because regulators have started to clue in that they might be securities offerings, I think that trend is slowing. I think that there might be other reasons to go offshore, and those might be that there is a favorable local regime. And like Giles was saying, that doesn't mean that you're exempt from laws around the world. But in Bermuda, for example, they have specific legislation dealing with ICOs. And so, if you're selling in Canada, you still have to deal with Canadian securities laws. But you can go into the Bermuda Monetary Authority and have your white paper reviewed and go through a process where you're being vetted to a certain extent, and you get to say, if a Canadian regulator comes knocking, you can be telling them that, look, we've been working with our local government. We have passed all of these tests,